we palpate. So when I just have her spread her thumb apart, and then I find a little spot, and then I'm going to push right down that groove. And I can be pretty kind of deep with that pressure there, because I'm really putting pressure on the bone. And probably one of the more important structures that we're going to palpate or be able to palpate here, because in younger adults and kids, and I don't know the age group, but probably 25 and less, when they fall on an outstretched hand, they break their scaphoid. When older adults fall, they usually break their distal radius. The problem with this particular fracture is it's not diagnosed well by initial x-ray. So what happens is this person has gone to the doctor, they have had their x-ray which is negative, and they come back. Now when they first fall, obviously you sprain your wrist, everything hurts. So when they're at the doctor, they're poking all over, they hurt kind of everywhere. But if I've now treated them for 2 weeks and it's still very tender, just right there, this is one time where that might be worth a call back to the doctor. Now if they haven't fallen, meaning no trauma, if they're saying, hey, it hurts when I write, I wouldn't think fracture. So it has to equal some type of traumatic event plus, and then usually they have a second x-ray or most likely a CT scan or an MRI to check the fracture out. And that's a problem in younger adults because the blood supply comes from one side of the bone to the other, and if it fractures, it usually cracks in half and disrupts the blood supply, so you could have a necrosis or an avascular necrosis. So it's usually a surgical candidate at that point. All right, so just that's why that's important to poke around. This is one time that it may not show up on x-ray, and you may be poking around on them 2 or 3 weeks later and think, wow, that's really tender, right in the snuff box, okay? Now, if we had this person in anatomical position, which I'm not going to put her there just from a twisting, but the anterior border of the anatomical snuff box, which is here, is the extensor pollicis brevis and the abductor pollicis longus. So the anterior border of the crease are those two tendons, okay? Again, physicians or occupational therapists will not say extensor pollicis brevis, by the way. They will just say EPB or EPL, extensor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, or APL, abductor pollicis longus, okay? There's just too many words.
What are they again?
So the anterior border is the abductor pollicis longus and the extensor pollicis brevis. The posterior border, so just right behind it, again, especially if I'm thinking anatomical position, right, is the extensor pollicis longus. All right? So we got the 3 tendons there. 2 extensor tendons and 1 abductor tendon, and that's what's making the borders of the snuff box. So if I'm poking down in the middle of it and it's tender, I'm thinking bone. If I'm kind of rolling up on those tendons, I'm thinking like a tendinitis, a tenosynovitis, something like that. So if I'm palpating, like I said, deep down in there and let it relax, I should have you tell it. So I have her pop it up so I can find it, and then I have her let it relax, because that makes the tissue soft and supple, and I can kind of dig down in there. If she keeps it kind of spread out like that, skin is kind of taut, it's kind of harder to kind of get down in there. It's also a little bit harder just to easily palpate, all right? So that's the anatomical snuff box. From the anatomical snuff box, if I work a little bit distally, right? If I go quite a bit distally, I'm going to try to find the CMC joint, all right? So I'm going to have her move her thumb around a little bit, and there should be, again, just a little divot there, and that divot should kind of come around like that. That's the CMC joint, right where you're feeling that divot. Now, the problem is, so distal to that is the metacarpal, proximal to that is the trapezium. So when I am on my joint line, if I just take my thumb off, actually the bone on the other side of that divot is the trapezium. It is not very far at all from the scaphoid. So I would have to bring my other hand and come like that to get on the scaphoid. If I put my thumb down like this, I'm on the joint line, the trapezium, and the scaphoid. So we're talking about palpating an area about this big and having 2 bones and a joint, 3 bones and a joint line in there, all right? So it's very tight quarters. We understand? Should be easy to get the scaphoid, easy to get the metacarpal, easy to get the joint line, and the trapezium just in between. Don't worry about the trapezium scaphoid joint. That's very hard to be able to figure that out, all right? So we're not doing that intercarpal joint, all right? And then let's do transverse carpal ligament with this, and then we'll go from there. So transverse carpal ligament, again, we're going to kind of find the pisiform over here. We'll come back and find that a little bit more later. But again, finding the scaphoid, pisiform in between that, transverse carpal ligament. It's not really palpable. I mean, it's palpable, it's right there, but you're not feeling anything. It's not like you're feeling it like your long bit of your bicep where you can roll it over. You're just touching an area where it's at, all right? Now, why would I touch it? Because I'm probably going to do soft tissue mobilization. So I'm going to stretch it. So I'm going to probably do like a splaying technique as a treatment, okay? So that's why I want to know where it's at. Hook of the hamate, pisiform to scaphoid, transverse carpal ligament. Also where we're going to do transverse carpal ligament. Also where we're going to do our Tenel sign later in the day. So we're going to take right over the transverse carpal ligament and tap to see if we get those nerve symptoms, okay? So that's why it's important for us to find that. So I'm going to find, or I'm going to come around to every group